streams to come on online. So I see here we got our YouTube is online, and our Periscope or Twitter is coming online, and our Facebook page, The Cry Dried Tear, is coming online. And here we go, our Facebook Helping Parents of Mentally Ill Children is coming on board. So hopefully, let me just give a click here for that. Okay. Hey, so hi everybody. Welcome to Helping Parents of Mentally Ill Children. My name's Bill McPhee, and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1987, and I was hospitalized 6 different times. I lived in 3 different group homes. I had a suicide attempt, and I spent 5 years on the couch, basically doing nothing, in a deep, deep, dark depression. And for 23 years, I published a magazine called SZ Magazine, which was a mental health magazine. I did that for 23 years. And today I'm kind of semi-retired. I'm retired, and I basically I promote my book. My book here is To Cry a Dried Tear, Bill McPhee's Journey of Hope and Recovery with Schizophrenia. And so I do that, and you can find more about me and about the book on my website at billmcphee.ca. And you can join us on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and all of those up there. I'm coming to you live tonight from Fort Erie, Ontario. It's not too far from Niagara Falls, Ontario. And I have the Buffalo skyline across the river of the Niagara River, and nice view. So basically today I have a guest, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information on our guest. So this is Darrell Herrmann, and Darrell is a former captain in the United States Army who was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1984, and then went on to earn a computer science degree. Darrell is a fascinating story, and he's another shining example of someone with a mental illness who is living a full and rewarding life. I'm excited for him to be here and to share his advice for parents and other caregivers. So we'll go back to both of us here. There we go. So Darrell, thank you very much for coming on the program here, and really appreciate it. And so Darrell, tell us a little bit about, first of all, where you were born and a little bit of your childhood, your growing up, your family, and things like that.
Well, I'm originally from a small family farm out in western Kansas near Dodge City. It was 30 miles east of Dodge City, Kansas. For those of you that are Western fans, that's the real Dodge City. I could literally say I got the heck out of Dodge. It was a very nice place to grow up. I learned a lot growing up as a farmer. Was milking cows before and after school, driving a tractor by the age of 6 or 7, and what farm boys did at that time was regular farm life. When I got through with high school, I went off to Kansas State University to study physics, and became a student at Kansas State University. While there, I got involved with ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, and like that, got involved with that. And when I graduated, I got a commission in the United States Army as a second lieutenant because I've been in ROTC. ROTC also paid for a lot of my college education. In return, I had to serve some time in the Army to pay off for my college education. That was 4 years active duty.
Wow.
I was actually on active duty for 8 years. I stayed after the requirement was up because I enjoyed what I was doing. And I was in the active duty in the Army for 8 years before I became schizophrenic. And
Okay, Darrell, let's just back up a bit. Let's just take it. I'm going to ask you some questions from back. So tell me a little bit about your farming. I can remember when I was just a little kid. I can remember waking up and watching on Saturdays. I think it was Agricultural USA, and I don't know if as a farmer if you watched that or anything like that. But did you have any brothers and sisters helping on on the farm? Did you have a big family?
Yes, I'm the oldest. I have one brother and one sister, and we all worked on the farm. You all had your chores, your things you had to do. Part of growing up was learning how to work and be a productive member of the family.
Yeah, and you know what? Farming is fantastic. A fantastic field to be in. My no pun intended. My some people at church are farmers, and it's very interesting. And I'm sure it's came a long way since you were farming, but it's there's a lot of science into farming and a lot of science and skill involved in farming these days.
It's totally different than when I grew up. The family farm I grew up doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So Darrell, tell me. So that was great. Tell me about your teen years. Now, were you what were you doing as a teenager, and how were you as a student in high school and things like that? Did you enjoy school?
As a teenager, I did things that were normal for my community at the time. I had some extra school activities, but the big thing in high school was just getting ready to graduate. I did okay, but not great. I was a B student average, uh, and that was because I was bored. Nothing was very challenging to me. When it came to my senior year, we started doing the placement exams. I took the ACT and the National Merit College Scholarship tests.
Hmm.
The National Merit College Scholarships, I was a semifinalist. In the ACT, I was a 99th percentile, top of my class.
Wow, wow.
And they finally realized how bright I was and just wasn't applying myself because I was bored.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. And yeah, so did you were you into any relationships in high school or after? Were you
No,
no? Okay, so
no.
and then tell me about how the enlisting went. Like, did you did you have trouble deciding what you wanted to do and everything? What made you to apply for the armed services? And then when you did apply, tell me a little bit about basic training.
Well, I didn't exactly enlist. What happens is you go to college and you get involved with ROTC, and that's how you get your training. It's not the same as enlisting.
Uh-huh.
Uh, we have an equivalent to basic training, which is the ROTC summer camp that meets in your junior year.
Uh-huh.
You go off to a military installation for about 6 or 8 weeks and get trained in military skills and how to do that, as in addition to what you've been getting in college with your ROTC professors.
Hmm.
And that's how you get started.
I
And we
see.
learn all the basics in that 6 8 weeks summer camp.
I see. Yeah, well, that was interesting then. Yeah. So, did you know then, so you were in our ROTC, and so you knew, was that kind of a calling for you? Do you think that you were meant to do that, or were you confused at all with what direction you wanted to take in your life, or was it a calling?
Well, I felt that it was a good calling. I wanted to be there because I thought I could serve my country and patriotic reasons,
Mhm.
and that's basically why I got involved. And as I said, I enrolled in ROTC when I was a freshman, got started in college, liked it, and just kept going.
Oh, good for you. Okay, so now then you're in the forces, and they recognize that you're very bright, and you what I know that you eventually were a captain, but did you start off with your a lower rank, or because ROT was like an officer school?
It's an officer school.
Okay,
I started as a second lieutenant, which is the lowest rank you can be as an officer in the Army.
I
You
see.
know, the second lieutenant was what I started as.
Oh, okay, very good. And then I know that we'll talk about your book in a bit, but I know from your book, which I read, that you were obviously you must have been very brilliant because you went into the nuclear area of the armed forces. You had a lot of responsibility, and I have to. I kind of have to chuckle because in your book you're using a little humor and you were saying that nuclear armament and schizophrenia kind of don't mix for obvious reasons, right?
Yes.
So tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about. Tell us how did you how did you get steered into the nuclear field?
Well, when I was getting ready to graduate from Kansas State University, I got assigned to the field artillery for my branch of service. And the field artillery at the time was the one that had all the nuclear weapons the Army had. We had cannon-launched nuclear weapons. We had small missiles and some large missiles too. The older people remember a missile called Pershing, which was very big in the Cold War at the time, and big negotiations between Reagan and the Soviet Union about the Pershing missiles. That was also part of the field artillery. And so when I got into field artillery, I ended up working with cannons, and primarily the 155 millimeter howitzer, and that has a nuclear weapon. That's how I got involved with nuclear weapons, was working with that. And I was learning how to assemble, maintain, and store and safely use the nuclear weapons with my cannons. And that continued for several years. And then I got involved in something else. I was a part of the 7th Corps Nuclear Weapons Inspection Team. I was selected to join them. And I traveled all over the 7th Corps in Germany, inspecting our nuclear capable units in the field artillery to be sure that they were properly trained and ready to use them if they had to.
Okay,
or properly maintaining and storing them.
So let me just ask you then regarding the nuclear stuff. Obviously, you dealt around it. Did you actually have to know the science and why a nuclear bomb is a nuclear bomb or a nuclear weapon because of the physics and everything like that? Like, do you understand all the background science in it?
I understand some of that because of my background in physics, but you don't have to know anything about that to be able to do what you need to do.
I see.
You're not designing the weapons. All you're doing is assembling and preparing them to fire. All the pieces are there. You just have to put it together and fire it. That's all you had to do.
Okay. So now, how long were you doing this then? How many years did what you're describing with the howitzer and everything for how many years was that?
The entire 8 years I was in the Army, I was working with them for the entire 8 years.
Okay, now when you had a break, so you had a break, and when did you have a break? Talk a little bit about your illness. Talk a little bit about pre-signs and how old were you when you were first having symptoms? Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, there weren't much signs going on. I was being screened constantly as a captain working nuclear weapons, and there were just no signs I was going downhill. Over a period of about 2 or 3 days, I just went downhill very rapidly, became psychotic, wound up in the hospital. Fortunately, my psychosis was such that I had delusions that I'd been drugged with an experimental drug.
Right.
And as a result of that, I decided to go to the Army hospital. So I got help before anything bad happened and before things got out of control.
Right. Okay.
And
Before you go on, just stop there. I want to take you back again a little bit. So we talked a little bit about first symptoms, and you didn't really have any there. But was there any mental illness in your family or in your history, in your relatives, or anything like that?
Yes, my father had mental illness. We believe it was schizophrenia, but we're not sure because no one ever told him his diagnosis. And I also have a great aunt that had mental illness. Again, I think the diagnosis was probably schizophrenia, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're a captain. You're being watched, but you started to had some symptoms, and that. But you didn't recognize the symptoms, but other people recognized symptoms. Did they?
No, it came on rapidly over a period of about 2 or 3 days, and I just became delusional and thought I'd been drugged. And the answer to being drugged and having problems with being drugged was to go to the Herrmann hospital. So I did, and they recognized what was going on fairly quickly.
Now tell me a little bit about that. So that's so obviously there's psychiatrists in the armed forces that looked at people, and because I would imagine just the fact that with schizophrenia it's 1 out of 100 in the population, and I'm sure that in the armed forces they see a lot of mental illness. They must screen for or see a lot, and so probably there wasn't probably a lot of stigma or people not knowing what's going on. Would you say that the people who were you talking to and getting diagnosed were kind of on the ball?
I wish I could, but they weren't.
Okay.
They realized what was going on fairly quickly, but we had one psychiatrist for the entirety of Fort Sill, which was where I was stationed at the time. And we had about 20,000 troops on the base, and all their family members that he had to provide support for too. One psychiatrist for the entire installation, so they didn't have much they could do.
Wow.
They initially kept me there in the hospital for a few days, put me on an antipsychotic, and sent me home.
Hmm.
Uh, the antipsychotic
Sent
was an old.
sent you home to where you were living when you're in the forces, or sent you home to out of the army?
Sent me to my apartment at Fort Sill,
Okay.
my home.
Okay.
Yeah, sent me to my apartment to have a couple days off and relax. And the medication was one that caused me some bad side effects. I felt terrible, like I had the flu all the time. I was kind of cramped up a little bit, and I know now it was EPS that was happening. Uh, and then one
Now
day I forgot.
describe, give us the definition of EPS, extrapyramidal side effects, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the shakiness, the jerkiness, the tenseness of the muscles, rigidity in the muscles, things like that.
Hmm.
And there's some other things that go too, but that's what I was experiencing. And one day I forgot to take my antipsychotic, and I just felt so much better that I decided I wasn't going to take it anymore.
Right.
So I went back and saw the army psychiatrist, and he said, "Well, that's okay. You don't have to take it." And about 2 weeks later, I pulled the psychotic in and I'm back in the hospital.
Huh.
And at that point, I realized that I did need to take my medication to stay out of the hospital, and I've never gone off them since.
Oh, okay. Right.
And they put me on a different medication then, and they sent me to a psychiatric unit at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas,
Oh.
which was the closest military installation that actually had a psychiatric ward. There was none on Fort Sill, even though we had 20,000 troops
Right.
and families there.
So Darrell, I just want to get a little bit of a time frame. So when you were psychotic, those 3 days that came on very rapidly, and you saw the army psychiatrist, and you got put on medication, and you went back to your apartment, and you stayed there. How long was that? What kind of time frame was that?
The time was about 2 to 3 weeks that all that transpired in before I became sick again and wound up at Shepherd Air Force Base.
Hmm.
And I celebrated my 30th birthday in a psychiatric unit at Shepherd Air Force Base. That was a real bummer for 30th birthday
Yeah.
because I knew my military career was over and didn't
Right.
know where I was going to go or what I was going to do.
Now, did you get a discharge, or like how how does that work? Like how long were you still part of the army before you were an official civilian again?
Well, they took some time to decide what they were going to do with me. They had to do certain out processing and stuff like that, and it took them about 6 months to get all the paperwork and everything together and get everything approved and everything. And what they did is they put me on something that's called the temporary disabled retired list, which means you're temporarily retired because of a disability,
Mm-hmm.
and they reevaluate you every year or so to see how you're doing. And they
Right.
can keep you on that list for up to 5 years before they make a final disposition of your case. When they put me on temporary disabled retired list or TDRL, I decided to go back to college, get a computer science degree,
Mm-hmm.
and try to make something of my life, even though I had no idea whether or not I could do that.
Right.
And so I went back to Kansas State University and got a computer science degree while I was on the temporary disabled retired list.
I see.
As I was getting ready to graduate with my computer science degree, they reevaluated me again, and they rated me as disabled, but not too disabled. The Army gave me a 30% disability rating and gave me retirement. So I'm medically retired. I'm still an officer in the Army, still a captain, but I'm just retired.
Oh, great. Wow, that's great, and that's quite an of achievement. Achievement. You must be very proud about that to have like that a ranking and this, to still be have your ranking as a captain. That's fantastic. That must give you a lot of joy and you must feel good about that.
I'm very proud that I served my country, yes.
Yeah, very good. I'm very happy to hear you, Darrell. Now, okay, so now for the folks that don't know Darrell, you are married now, right? So
Yes.
so tell us a little bit. You went into computer science, so tell us a little bit about going into computer science and the field you wanted to go, and then talk about how you met your wife. A little fill in the gaps, a little bit like that.
Well, at Kansas State University, I studied computer science, and I got the actual technical degree, not the business degree. I got the technical degree that allows you to work in science and technology stuff and heavy duty computer science. But when I graduated, no one was hiring for that. So I got a computer science position with Phillips Petroleum Company in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, as a computer programmer in their business systems. And because I was a technical computer programmer, I didn't know a lot about business systems. I had to learn that on the job.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I had taken one semester of COBOL, which is the primary language they used at Phillips Petroleum Company that I work with. And I knew a little bit about it, and they taught me some more. And I started working as a computer programmer at Phillips Petroleum Company. did very well there, and stayed there for 3 years before I had to leave and go to a different place. And then I went to Dallas, Texas,
Wait,
and worked for.
Daryl, just slow down. I just want to take you back a little bit, okay? So what I want to get at is that a lot of times people with mental illness find it very difficult to go back to school and to study, to concentrate, to socialize, to that. And you come across as very confident and well put together and everything like that. You come across very confident. What were you confident when you go into school and that, or did you have a time where you're emotionally dealing with any of the negative symptoms, the depression, the lack of motivation, the emotional blandness, the bluntness, no hope, depression, or because that's quite an undertaking that you did and quite amazing. So talk a little bit about how your emotions and how you accomplished that.
Well, emotions were something I just dealt with as I went along. It wasn't too severe. I was concerned about getting myself a future and building a future, and that's what I was looking at all the time. When I first started back to college, one of the things I found out was that I couldn't read very well anymore. Prior to becoming ill, I was always reading, always had a book in my hands, always studying something. But when I started college the second time, I could barely read the textbooks. I could read about 4 or 5 pages and have to take a break. So I had to learn how to read all over again. And today I can read a book if I have to, cover to cover, but I don't enjoy it. Before I became ill, I enjoyed reading, and now it's hard work.
Right.
So I don't read that much except what I have to read.
Mm-hmm.
And for a computer program, you have to be able to read books about computer languages and use them.
Right.
I can sit down with a book on a computer language and read it cover to cover and be programming in it in about 2 or 3 days. And that's one of the skills I had to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not easy. I had to start over with that. Also, I changed medications while I was in college. After my first semester, I was on one that it kept the psychotic symptoms under control, but I couldn't think as clearly as I needed to be doing what I was doing. And so we changed medications, and I got on a different one that had worked well for me before, but had to stop for a different reason. And that medication worked much better for me. I could think much more clearly. And then I went ahead and finished the 2 years it took me to get my computer science degree.
Okay. So Darrell, just before jump, I just want to ask you before we go a little bit further. Can you tell me, did you experience any stigma from other of your peer students or your professors or your teachers or your friends, or did you keep it inside yourself? Did you ever were you public or with your illness?
No, I was not public. No one knew about it. And outside medical communities, the doctors I was seeing knew about that, but no one else. No one at the school.
Wow.
And I just kept it quiet and did it all on my own.
Wow. And how did your family, did you tell your family, like your parents and your brothers and sisters, were they supportive? Talk a little bit about that. And as well, when you're talking about that, talk a little bit about if you have any advice for parents out there who have children dealing with a mental illness.
Well, in my case, I was already out on my own, had been for 8 years. So I was not that close to my family physically or involved with them that close. We're still family, of course. We still talk to each other and everything. But I was not physically close to them and haven't been since. And so they were somewhat distant because of geographics, but they were supportive as they could with the distances involved, and did support me. And of course, my father having mental illness also made it a little more understandable, so that I got support from my family. The key thing, I think, is to learn as much as you can about whatever diagnosis you have, whether it's schizophrenia, schizoaffective, or bipolar, or cancer, or diabetes, or heart disease. The more you know about what you've got, the better off you are.
Yeah, and Darrell, I just want to say this is a perfect segue to promote your book. I'm going to do that. So, Darrell, you're the author of Straight Talk, about living with a severe mental illness. And I read the book, very good book, great, lots of information. So we'll also talk about your book a little bit later, but I just thought that was a great time to mention your book. But go a little bit further. So now you're in school, you kind of graduated and go from there.
I want to go back just a moment before I
Yep.
graduated too, while we're talking about this. One of the things I tried to do when I got out of the hospital in the Army was I wanted to find out what I had and how to deal with it, what it was. To me, the logical thing was to steady up on it and find out what was going on. Well, I decided to go to the city library and I looked at psychology textbooks, and the Army had not told me what my diagnosis was. They wouldn't tell me that, but they did let me read my medical records. We had a legal right to.
Uh,
In the medical records, it said schizophreniform disorder. Well, I couldn't find that in any of the psychiatric books I looked at, but I did find schizophrenia, and I realized that the symptoms were exactly the same.
right.
Now I know that schizophreniform disorder means you've had symptoms of schizophrenia for more than 30 days, but less than 6 months. And in 6 months, they changed the diagnosis of schizophrenia, that is schizophreniform disorder. And that's what the Army did with me eventually. They changed the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And I tried to learn as much as I could about schizophrenia. It was
Mhm.
very difficult at the time because this was 1984, 1985, and there just wasn't much out there.
Yes.
What was there was based on psychoanalysis, which in my opinion was total garbage.
Right.
It clearly didn't fit me or my case at all. And then I found a book called Surviving Schizophrenia by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey,
Mhm.
MD.
Yep.
And that was the book that really set me on the path to recovery because that explained in clear, simple terms what schizophrenia was, how it treated, how people dealt with it. And that was the thing that got me going and started my recovery.
Yeah, that was a great buy for you people out there. Dr. Torrey's book, "Surviving Schizophrenia." It's a gold standard. It's a classic. It is very very good, very good book. Yeah. So you know what, and that's great. Darrell, that you had insight and you wanted to learn about your illness. Unfortunately, a lot of people with mental illness will deny they have a mental illness, and in fact, because their brain is broken, they don't the brain never really will admit to it, kind of thing. And it's like, like we say, you know, I know that you mentioned it a little bit in your book where I read that you compare a mental illness and a physical illness almost together, and I kind of disagreed with that, because from my point of view is that mental illness is not just as easy as a physical illness of diabetes or heart disease or something like that, because if I fell down and broke my arm and my bone was out of my skin and there was blood, my brain would say, Bill, you need to go to the hospital and get that broken arm fixed and in a cast and everything like that. But unfortunately, with a mental illness, a lot of times our brain is broken, but we don't know it's sick. It doesn't know it's sick. That's why with physical illness, the brain always knows you're sick, where with mental illness, sometimes the brain doesn't realize it's sick.
It's very true. And there's a thing called anosognosia, which is what you're talking about
Yeah.
there, which is when you're sick with mental illness, but you don't recognize it. And that's a very important thing to understand.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of the problem with schizophrenia is the fact that our medical professionals do not tell us what to do with it, how to deal with it, don't explain what it is. Sometimes they won't even tell you what your diagnosis is. Some people only get a bottle of pills, come back in 30 days.